So this is something I've been meaning to do for a while, and it's partially to keep some diversity in my channel. I don't want to exclusively do one thing. Kind of want to shotgun the board and see what goes what. But I'm sure a lot of you during this corona epidemic probably have run out of a lot of things to watch on Netflix, YouTube, Hulu, Disney Plus, whatever. And I kind of got to thinking the other day, because I'm one of those people that hates just shitting on things and quoting the bad stuff. I like to kind of network ideas and figure out new ways to improve them, even if it doesn't matter to anybody but me. I kind of wondered what would make a good TV show. A TV show that could kind of do whatever it wanted, keep fresh from week to week, something that would be easy to work with, easy to sell, and just something in general that would make for a decent TV show. And I kind of got to thinking of internet stories and fan groups, kind of those places that most writers go to find, freshly treaded ground. And ended up with the SCP Foundation wiki, and I kind of remember reading them in high school and thought, you know what, it'd be kind of a cool idea to pitch an idea for a TV show, which is kind of what I hope to do here. So I did some thinking, wrote some ideas down in a notebook, and I decided to put into a video just to catalog purposes or to kind of test the waters and see where the cookies fall. So, first and foremost, for the uninitiated, let's start off with what the SCP Foundation is. It stands for Secure, Contain, Protect. They have a logo, I have it up on screen here. But basically, what it was a bunch of fan sourced articles and story ideas and short tellings that all kind of followed a general format about weird anomalous objects, creatures, and things that would exist in our world, and a special organization whose sole job it was to secure, contain, and protect them. There was no real specifications as to what could and couldn't be an SCP. You basically had things fall into the realms of three type of categories: safe, anybody can use it; Euclid, kind of safe but could be misused to cause some harm, but initially by itself not really dangerous; and then Keter, which is extremely dangerous for one reason or another. And these kind of were really popular around the early 2010s, late double aughts, and they kind of faded off into obscurity. As of now, there's about 5,000 SCPs that are actually cataloged. Most of them are just paragraphs at this point in time, and some of them are direct ripoffs of anime or pop culture things that people think they're clever for writing. But it's also spawned a lot of like fan fiction sourcing, and its own kind of canon and lore has taken off. And that's kind of why I thought it would be a really great idea to start a show, is because you basically have this giant archive of pretty much pre-made ideas for young writers to cut their teeth on and to work with. You have a pretty well-established lore basis, and you have a fan source community that's feeding you ideas. So once you start the concepts, someone might say, okay, there's a good chance I could get my show made, and they might consider going and writing. And it really just benefits anybody and everybody. And it'd be kind of cool to have a TV show that's based upon a fan sourced concept that came from the internet as like almost a joke or a meme. And that once the show kicked up, it kind of inspired young writers to kind of jump in and feed the pool, as it were. So here's how I plan to do the show, or at least my pitch for the show. You have a group of writers who are constantly in flux. Maybe if you have a writer that wants to stick around and is showing really good, they're allowed to kind of have their own canonology within the greater universe. But for the most part, you're just trying to get young writers and young cinematographers a chance to do their own episodes and a chance to have some type of money or time under their belt when they move on to the greater part of the industry. And the way you do that with writing is you might have two people that want to work on an idea, and let's say they want to do like a buddy cop drama with maybe, I don't know, two sapphic lesbians that go around and find the SCPs and kind of do tracking on them. Maybe you have somebody who wants a more grittier military aspect that shows the away teams actually going and catching the SCPs and retaining them or doing first contact. Maybe you have a horror writer who writes how the SCP first comes in contact with humans, and the SCP Foundation isn't involved at all. It's just people encountering the SCP on their own and filing a report. You could also just have a Warehouse 13 gimmick where it's just people bumming around the facilities, doing research, going through their daily motions, and maybe there's a overarching plot in there, a sinister conspiracy the higher ups want you to deal with. And maybe those people, as they're writing stories, they each get a cycle in the rotation. As they do better, they get better and bigger SCPs. And then for the more fan favorite SCPs, all the teams come together to work on a singular aspect, or maybe people who excel in one area or another that are a good theme with that fan favorite SCP get to go and do that. And that's really what it is. You have over 5,000 SCPs. You can pull pretty much one for anything you want, and you run with the show. There's no official continuity, so the episodes can be however you want to do them. If you want one episode that's the buddy cop one, and then maybe two episodes that are kind of dark and gritty, that are two different separate ones. Next thing you know, the buddy cops come back when that writer was doing their next writing piece. You have a lot of stuff to work with here. Not to mention that as you are pulling these ideas from the actual wiki, people might see that and want to start putting it in. This is a really big thing for Netflix right now. It has to compete with YouTube, with Amazon Prime, Hulu, and Disney Plus, all which are groups that have individual strengths and merits. Disney can just outdo you with movies and its own access streaming platform, its own proprietary methods. Amazon Prime is a big money holder and has been putting out some banging episodes and really pushing its Prime experience. Hulu pretty much picks up whatever Netflix doesn't use, and YouTube is trying to get into that game with their content creators, but I mean, it's definitely in its infant stages. Netflix could come out and say, hey, we may not be producing huge market movies and huge bang up ideas, and we've kind of been an old hat at this, but we're doing something even better. We're giving young creators, writers, producers, filmographers, cinematographers, art house designers a way to get into the industry, and we're fan sourcing people's content that allows us to kind of directly with the fans. We're going to the fans and asking them what they want to see. They produce us some materials. We give them a writing credit or some credentials for their work. We thank them for their time, and we produce this show. People would really like that. People would like to see a show made with just the little guys involved, people trying to earn their way. Everyone likes that underdog mentality, and that's what really could set Netflix apart in doing this show. And if worse comes to worse, let's say you make a bad episode, it's fine. It's going to be replaced another time anyways. It's not like Game of Thrones where one bad episode can really ruin the continuity. With an open continuity like this, you make one dark horror episode with blood and guts and it didn't really work well, people weren't not liking it, you switch over to a suspenseful horror. It's like people are walking through a cursed ship or something. You can do different ways about that. There's 1,000 ways to look at it that would really allow people to have some originality. And let's face it, even though I didn't mention a buddy cop option in here, those kind of buddy cop play-by-play weekly soap opera type deals have kind of run their course. So having that as a motif while also breaking it up consistently could go a long way to making a really good show. And if nothing else, it would be a good storytelling device. So next I want to get into kind of the more esoteric ideas. Another part of the SCP Foundation, as I said earlier, is the Global Occult Coalition, or basically the United Nations of the SCP universe. You wouldn't even have to do every single episode with an SCP, because we don't want to do this as a Monster of the Week type of show. You can maybe have an episode, this is the one I pitched, where you have the sapphic lesbian couple that one writer wrote. Maybe we're involved in an incident where an SCP got loose and was exposed to the public and the people saw it. And you SCP Foundation runs big process to make an internet meme and a creepy pasta, something to freak people out as a cover up. And maybe they're being held before the UN. The UN and the Security Council is saying, yeah, this is completely, how can you do this? And they give their speech. Okay, this creature was a lot stronger than we thought. It tricked us. And they give their testimonies as kind of a flashback. And then maybe the GOC kind of come in and say, well, hold on, we've been observing the SCP Foundation for some time, and this is the actual story that went down, kind of revealing that the SCP Foundation, even though there are protagonists, they do have an agenda to push, and they don't believe in open information movement, and that they're unreliable narrators. But the GOC are also unreliable narrators because they're trying to pitch the idea that the SCP Foundation can't be trusted. And the SCP Foundation and the GOC kind of form this antithesis. The SCP is about preserving anomalies and studying them and seeing what they can benefit from the research, while the SCP Foundation believes anything that is a threat to humanity should instantly be wiped off the face of the earth. And I think a good writer would present both those ideas as equally valid and showing the pros and cons of each and where some ideas like that work and some ideas like that don't, and letting the audience kind of decide how it's going to work out, which also kind of establishes this constant rivalry but a constant need to not really push the barrier anywhere. Interesting idea, probably hasn't been tried before, but hey, worth a shot. Can't go wrong. Never tried it. And if all else fails, people don't want to see a courtroom hearing. Like I said, it's a one throwaway episode. It's there and it's gone. If nothing else, it can serve as the filler episode. And you have an entire writing staff that's going to be creating stuff as we're going on. So you're really not going to be at a loss for episodes. You produce the episodes, you fan check it out, maybe run a Patreon system where patrons or early supporters of the show get to view it for a week. If it's a bad episode, you can use that metric to kind of weigh in different points. Or you can just run the ideas of, there's a lab tech who doesn't even really engage with the SCPs, more or less floats around and maybe just has a alternate conspiracy. You can have multiple timelines and multiple stories going on at once, and it can kind of lead people to be intrigued. Like every week, ooh, is this the story we talk about the sapphic lesbian couple fighting crime, or is this the season we just watch the flesh that hates gets interviewed by a military squad? You have a lot of ways to do this, and you have a lot of questions to ask. And you could even do things where it doesn't involve SCPs at all. You could just take it from the position of a standard grunt, or you could even have points of view from the SCPs having discourse. You have a lot of options to work with there, and as since it's fan sourced, fans might bring in some new ideas and help feed your funnel. There is a small problem to be had with a fan sourcing site, but we'll get into that in just a moment. For right now, I want us to really focus on the idea of having a show that can cover all the bases, that can switch at will, and that has the high chance of breaking a lot of tropes and norms because it's a lot of throwaway stuff. And like I said, it's really just a way to let young writers get their time in, and people might turn on and try it out. And with 5,000 SCPs, you're pretty much guaranteed for a few seasons. You might not even have to run the SCP. You can run from the GOC's foundation. You can run mystery. You can run horror. You can do a creature of the week feature. You have prop houses and different groups that might be interested in doing and changing things. And you could even offer up some SCPs that aren't even dangerous. You could offer some SCPs that are actually helpful, or take SCPs that exist and expand upon them, or make them better, or however you want to do it. The benefit of the SCP Foundation is that they do rewrite their own. They have a lot of magical MacGuffins and mimetic bullshit, memory loss, things like that, that really help people. Basically, you can rewrite out whatever you want and replace it and just say, oh, you remember that SCP being something different? You're probably under effect of mimetic cancer, or you probably had an amnestic or some type of memory loss device, and that's why you remember it differently. Really play on that meta. So that's the pitch. SCP based show with a lot of open ended ways to write it, focusing on giving young kids and young writers and young authors a chance to kind of break the mold and operate within their own boundaries. And you have a lot of fan source to work with and fresh ground to tread that isn't going to be the same stuff with a different coat of paint. Before I go, I'd like to thank you all for basically coming back to my channel or joining me on my channel. I'm finishing up my last little bit of university work right now. I will be moving back home, so my setup will get a lot better. Um, I'm still going to be doing a couple of these pitch videos. I have a couple of them lined up. And on top of that, I also have some other gaming stuff, some podcast things I'm working on that I'll bring on the channel. So expect an update in content, an update in quality, and hopefully a pretty more consistent release schedule going into things. Thank you all so much for rejoining me on my trip into YouTube, and I hope to see you all soon.